Now I will take up the second stage, that is 1905 to 1908. Now 1905 is an important year in the history of China because that was the year when a war took place, not with China. It was a Russo-Japanese war of 1904 and 1905, and which ended in the defeat of Russia. This defeat of Russia at the hands of Japan had an impact on China which is quite significant. As a matter of fact, it removed China's sense of shame by being defeated in the hands of Japan earlier, because Chinese people started to feel that if such a large country like Russia could be and Russia was taken as a European country, if such a large European country like Russia could be defeated by such a small Asiatic country like Japan, then there should be no harm, there should be no shame in facing defeat at the hands of Japan in the earlier war, in the Sino-Japanese war. So there is no shame in China being defeated at the hands of Japan, because Japan had also defeated a very large European country like Russia. So it removed the sting, the shame. Now it was a new sense of realization, and there was a demand was raised within China to understand, to go to Japan, to understand how it became possible, and it was realized that since Japan became modernized, it was this modernization of Japan which explains why Japan could score such a convincing victory over Russia in a war. So people started to go to Japan to know what that modernization was all about. So it was something new. It was something new thing, no doubt about it. It was after that Sun Yat-sen formed a new organization, and that was Revolutionary Brotherhood, or Tung Meng Hui. Revived China Society was no longer there, because in its place we have the formation of a new society, the new Revolutionary Brotherhood, which was formed in 1905. And it was this new society, new organization, which propelled the movement forward. Sun Yat-sen's main thesis was that all the anti-dynastic efforts should be unified. Anti-Manchu dynasty efforts should be unified. And he knew that since there are many groups, there should be unification of the groups, and there should be no sporadic outbreaks, isolated outbreaks, because if there are isolated outbreaks, then that would lead to chaos. And foreign powers would take advantage of the chaos and would intervene. So Sun Yat-sen had this idea in his mind that all anti-dynastic efforts should be unified. That is number one. And the second was that the revolution movement should proceed in such a way that foreign powers would not find any pretext for intervention in China. So these were the two things which had been uppermost in his mind. He, of course, organized the students, Chinese students who had been staying in Japan at that time. In fact, Sun Yat-sen was back from Europe to Japan by then. He had been staying there, and it was in Tokyo that in July 1905 that there was the meeting, and after the meeting this new society, Tung Meng Hui, was formed. Now this Tung Meng Hui was different from all previous revolutionary bodies, not just the Revived China Society, Sing Chung Hui, but other revolutionary bodies also. Now all other bodies bore the mark of secret societies, and all those bodies were rather local in character. But this new organization was something like a modern political party. It very much resembled the features of the modern political party, and it was not at all local in character. It was quasi-national, regional or quasi-national, or national in character. The other bodies were located in the coastal zones, most of the other bodies. But this new body, this new organization extended its network to the interior of China. Other bodies were mostly concentrated in Canton, Cantonese in character, overwhelmingly Cantonese. But the new organization was more broad-based, and it commanded multi-provincial and even national support. And it also enlisted the support of the intellectuals, overseas Chinese, many of the overseas Chinese, secret societies, small and middle sized businessmen, particularly those who had been doing their business in the city of Shanghai. Now this Tung Meng Hui leadership adopted a program of revolution. It consisted of 8 documents, including the Manifesto of the Military Government, Manifesto of the World, and many other things. And meanwhile, Sun Yat-sen also developed his 3 principles of the people: people's nationalism, people's democracy, and people's livelihood. We are not going into Sun Yat-sen's principles today. The first decade of the 20th century witnessed a nationwide crisis throughout China. The Qing rulers had already surrendered to the foreign powers, and there was inflation, widespread inflation, financial turmoil, industrial development was totally crippled, and China's position in the outside market, outside world also deteriorated, and foreign powers were busy making inroads into China, making compromises among themselves, and doing their best to make inroads into China. And this internal crisis of the Manchu state, an imperialist penetration, manifested itself in the occurrence of disturbances in many areas. There were sporadic outbreaks, tax riots, political movements of one type or another. There were revolts in some counties, important revolts in some counties, in the Guangdong province, in the Guangxi province, in the Anhui province, etc. But all these movements were crushed by the Manchu rulers. But despite the failure of these rebellions, as the Chinese historian Tang Liang Li argues, none of these movements was dead, because these movements kept alive the revolutionary heritage, of the Chinese people. Third stage of the revolution of 1911, which starts from 1909. We know that during that period the Manchu rulers adopted a number of reforms, there was the later Qing reforms from 1901 to 1908. And then in August 1908, a 9-year program of constitutional reform was adopted. And the main aim of the Manchu rulers was to pass on to a parliamentary form of government on the Western model. But then the psychology of the Chinese people had gradually became favorable for the Chinese Revolution. Now, those who had experienced limited parliamentary power wanted to have more. They were not satisfied, so they were eager for having more and more such constitutional power. And provincial spirit also developed. We have pointed out earlier that railway lines were constructed, and the ownership of the railway lines, railway companies were handed over. Control was handed over to the foreigners. So that naturally caused a public outcry against these changes. The government retaliated by arresting people, and so that led to more and more movements of one type or another. And the crisis became very sharp, and by then Sun Yat-sen had been preparing, along with his own organization Tung Meng-hui, for a final showdown with the Manchu rulers. He activated secret societies, particularly the Triad Society. Triad Society was activated by Sun Yat-sen during that period. Actually, the movement started in September 1911. There was a rising in Sichuan, which stimulated the revolutionary mood of the people. And events were precipitated by the accidental explosion of a bomb in an ammunition depot in Hankow in 9th October 1911. Then the Imperial Army at Wuchang mutinied. These people came from Japan. These were the Chinese students, military students, who went to Japan to receive military training. And when they came back to China, they had by then been sufficiently influenced by revolutionary ideology. And so we have the Wuchang mutiny, and the viceroy fled. And in fact, within a few months, a number of the provinces of China came under the control of the Republicans. And the Manchu rulers were defeated. They had to step down. Wan Shikai now became the premier of China, and he favored a settlement. Sun Yat-sen proclaimed the republic, and the date was 1st January 1912. It was in Nanking, and in fact, the China came to be divided into two parts. The Republicans were in control of South China, with Nanking as their capital, and Wan Shikai and his forces were in control of North China, with Peking as the capital. It was this revolution of 1911 which naturally got rid of the Manchu rule, and a new form of government, the Republican form of government, was established for the first time in China.
My question is, what role did the growth of provincialism play in the movement?
I have pointed out in the last episode that when they introduced the later Qing reforms, there was an attempt at centralization. Modernization also means centralization. In the earlier period, there were regions, the regional governors who enjoyed powers. And there was the formation in the later period of a central army under the command of the central government, Peking government. So provincialism, it affected provincialism. And then in our period, when railway lines were being established, railway lines were constructed through different provinces. It moved from one province to another. But provinces did not have any say, did not have any role to play, because railway lines, these are owned and controlled. Their ownership and the control, both were handed over to the foreign powers by the Manchu rulers. So naturally, people living in the provinces, the powers that be in the provinces, they were very angry, and so they became anti-Manchu to a large extent. So if any attempt was made to put an end to Manchu rule, they would willingly extend their assistance to those efforts.
So my question to you is that you were talking about the Revolutionary Brotherhood, this society, they attracted widespread support of these secret societies. So were these societies themselves secret, the Revolutionary Brotherhood and the Revived China Society, were they themselves secret societies?
Yes, they had to operate in a clandestine manner because they, in one sense or other, they had declared a war against the Manchu state. It's a war against the Manchu state. So their main aim was the end of Manchu rule. So it's a war against the Manchu state. So they cannot operate openly in China, never. We will now make an assessment of the revolution of 1911. This revolution was a bourgeois democratic revolution in China. In the sense that it was led by the bourgeoisie and the Chinese national bourgeoisie, not the competitor bourgeoisie, but the Chinese national bourgeoisie played an important role in this. But this revolution also suffered from certain limitations. When we talk about the Tung Meng Hui program, there was nothing anti-foreign. Clearly, no. They were not vocal against foreign powers. They wanted to do away with Manchu rule, and they did away with Manchu rule. But the end of Manchu rule does not mean the end of feudalism, because if a truly republican form of government was to be established, then it would have to be also anti-feudal, and it would also have to be anti-imperialist, both of them. But to become anti-Manchu was definitely something anti-feudal, but that is not enough. So in both these cases, these were two of the major limitations from which it suffered. It was not totally anti-imperialist because it avoided making any public statements against foreign powers, because they felt that if they are very much anti-foreign in their statements, then foreign powers should intervene. So they should get some pretext. That was his consideration. And the second point was that it did not put an end to feudalism. So the Chinese society remained as before, more or less, even though the Manchu rule came to an end. So it was a failure in that sense, and it was, of course, incomplete. And that is the reason why in 1949, Mao Zedong had to accomplish the new democratic revolution, anti-imperialist and anti-feudal. The revolution of 1911 took place in the context of the penetration of the imperialist powers into China. Foreign penetration resulted in a deep socio-economic crisis and the surrender of the Manchu ruling government to the foreign powers. It was the outcome of a series of movements of different types against foreign control and Manchu exploitation. It was divided into three stages: A. 1894 to 1904, B. 1905 to 1908, and 1909 to 1911. The social basis of the movement consisted of students, teachers, secret societies, government officials, national bourgeoisie, overseas Chinese military students in Japan, clerks and armed peasants. This revolution was regarded as a bourgeois democratic revolution. It was led by Sun Yat-sen. Revolutionary organizations such as Tung Meng Hui, Guang Fu Hui, and Hua Xing Hui played important roles. Since the Chinese national bourgeoisie was economically weak and politically flabby, and had both contradictions with imperialism and feudalism, as also proneness to compromise with its enemies, this revolution succeeded only to a certain degree and proved to be a failure in the end. there was a demand was raised within China to understand, to go to Japan, to understand how it became possible, and it was realized that since Japan became modernized, it was this modernization of Japan which explains why Japan could score such a convincing victory over Russia in a war. So people started to go to Japan to know what that modernization was all about. So it was something new. It was something new, new thing, no doubt about it. It was after that Sun Yat-sen formed a new organization, and that because that was the year when a war took place, not with China. It was a Russo-Japanese war of 1904 and 1905, and which ended in the defeat of Russia. This defeat of Russia at the hands of Japan had an impact on China which is quite significant. As a matter of fact, it removed China's sense of shame by being defeated in the hands of Japan earlier, because Chinese people started to feel that if such a large country like Russia Now I will take up the second stage, that is 1905 to 1908. Now 1905 is an important year in the history of China. And Russia was taken as a European country. If such a large European country like Russia could be defeated by such a small Asiatic country like Japan, then there should be no harm, there should be no shame in facing defeat at the hands of Japan in the earlier war, in the Sino-Japanese war. So there is no shame in China being defeated at the hands of Japan, because Japan had also defeated a very large European country like Russia. So it removed the sting, the shame. Now it was a new sense of realization, and there was